The scientist will talk about a beautiful solution, or a mathematician, a beautiful solution to a question. Generally, what they mean is that it's powerful and simple, and so they feel that the logic is powerful and simple. What I would say is that when the scientist develops a hypothesis, he doesn't typically reason it out. I'm interested to see what the scientists would argue, but typically what happens is that you're aware of a pattern of what occurs. So you're looking at the language of science is typically mathematics, not always, but typically, and that dominates. But you're effectively saying, I could see a pattern here, an order, and when I take the wide view, and then there's something missing, and that missing point goes there. Let's test that out. And ultimately, it's rare that the hypothesis is produced through reason. It's very often produced through an intuitive guess. Clearly, it's in the whole, only the scientist who is aware of all the theory, who's aware of the mathematics, can make that leap. But effectively, it's intuition, it's guesswork, and then you test it. You say, that seems to work, and then you try and explain it, and that's where you come up with the theorem, or the mathematical equation that explains the new thing. And then you try and predict something else that has never occurred before. You test that, and that becomes a theorem. It goes from hypothesis to theorem. Now, the ability to see the pattern of things is actually the same as the ability to apprehend beauty. Beauty recognizes the relationship between things that are appropriate to what it is. It sees a pattern in the world and is able to complete it. And so that's what creativity is. It's being able to spot that pattern. Now, there are cases where scientists have done this. They've looked at plots on a graph. The one that was brought to my attention was a scientist in the 60s, but it's just such a nice example, called Murray Gell-Mann, I think his name is pronounced, who discovered a quark, a subatomic particle. But there were 9 of these particles known, and he looked at the plot on a graph of these 9 particles, and they effectively looked like a pyramid with the point missing. And the only reason that he investigated the existence of this 10th quark was it looked to him as though there ought to be another one in that position. And so it was actually an arrangement mathematically. They don't arrange themselves like this in space. It's a mathematical plot that has 4 dots on the baseline, 3 above it, 2 above it, and then you have 1 above it. And so it's 10 dots in the pattern of a pyramid, effectively. Now, what's interesting when I read that is that if you go back to the ancient Greeks, all the way to Pythagoras, by reputation, they're described by Plato, they tried to describe the pattern of order musically, mathematically, in a way, and look for those patterns that delighted people. Because they associated this with the beauty, and they felt that if they could reproduce those patterns that they thought they could observe in nature, and especially in music, in buildings and in other things, then if they were correct, you'd look at the buildings and you'd say they were beautiful. They looked at the proportions of man, for example, and tried to describe them mathematically and then use those same proportions in buildings. The premise here is that if we find man generally beautiful, good in his being, and then we copy that in buildings, if it's part of the mathematics of it, then the building will be beautiful.